Hello and welcome to another managerial special from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm joined by Craig and Charlie as always, and today we are talking about yet another managerial replacement in the EFL, and this time we're going right up to the northeast to Sunderland, because Lee Johnson earlier today was appointed on a 2.5-year deal as head coach, something we'll get to later, at Sunderland under the new sporting director, Christian Speakman. A lot of changes going on off the pitch there, and that is going to lead me to our first question, which is for Charlie. We're going to talk about the old manager, we'll talk about the new one. But firstly, Charlie, one of the problems we've had when we've talked about a lot of these, I'm thinking about the likes of Wigan perhaps, even Mansfield to an extent, there's been plenty of others too, is any of the ones where there's been a little bit of turmoil on the pitch, generally the thing it's had in common is uncertainty off it. Now, that's something that's currently in process at Sunderland at the moment. It looks like it's resolving itself. But with these situations where managers are coming and going, can things ever truly be resolved until the off-the-field stuff is sorted?
Well, no, because I think I think if you even take it out of a football context, and I'm the obvious thing is to talk about that documentary that they've done on Netflix, but I think it goes, a lot deeper than that. And if you took it in any business, it has to be any successful businesses or companies, it's stability all the way through the business, not just, at the bottom end, which, in a football team's case would be the players, or at the top end of just the chairman. It has to be all the way through. You look at the most successful teams in, forget the Premiership, even in the Championship now, they're sustainable from top to bottom. Sunderland, sadly, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, it's probably the opposite of that. There's some parts of the club which are brilliant. The support that the fan base they've got is second to none. And you can't ever fault that. There are other elements of the club that are really, really. There's a worry about how some parts of that department of the football club are run. I think that's probably the politest way to put it. And I think all the time you've got fractious, different, divisive sort of things going on, you're always going to struggle on the pitch, as this has proved.
Absolutely. And Craig, I will come to you with our usual question about the previous manager before we move on to the new head coach. And that man was Phil Parkinson. Now, I realise that this question and your answer and possibly mine will be controversial here. But one of the things we've got to look at is until the last 3 games before he left in the league, Phil Parkinson, results-wise, take away the style of football, the way he talked about the club off the pitch, it wasn't a disaster. 3 games, a defeat and 2 draws, left them in 8th place, 7 points off the top. But my question to you, Craig, is do you feel it was harsh or even perhaps slightly early, if nothing else?
I think where, obviously, Charlie said about reputation with Sunderland, obviously, you say it's a massive club of being League One. Obviously, everyone tipped them. This is the first season now in League One. Last season got stopped earlier than expected. But for Sunderland, they should be expecting to be in the top 2. Let's be honest. And being 8th is not all right. It's not good enough, but they're still only a few points behind the top 6. But that's what happens. Expectations are so high for a big club like Sunderland in League One. It's an impossible task. It's a very hard job to get over the line, to be honest. Is where obviously you looked at Jack Ross beforehand and obviously lost in the playoff final, which is really hard. I know I keep every time I go back to this about Luton. But obviously when you have a big club like Luton were in the National League with the conference at that time, expectations were high. So it's the pressure on being in the top 2, finally getting out of League One, it's so high. It's an impossible job.
I joked in our WhatsApp group. I think they got beat by MK Dons 2-1 on the 14th of November. And I joked Phil Parkinson, the next one of our managerial specials. And he wasn't. But that was only 3 weeks ago. And on a live to me, I only joked about it. I honestly didn't believe that 3 weeks later we'd be genuinely having this conversation. I mean, he was sacked, a week ago? So it's probably 2 weeks between the two, sort of the game and then him getting sacked. So, yeah, incredible.
But to be fair, Charlie, I mean, Craig sort of said it. The Sunderland fans have a right to have that expectation because, fan base-wise, reputation-wise, they're a huge club at that level. Me and Craig both had them in the top 2 this season. There's a reason for that, because they are a massive club. The fan base is huge. The fan base is expectant. And as well as the players not delivering, if you go on those little runs, it doesn't take as long for it to fall into a crisis, does it?
No, in that sense, no. And I think it just shows you that even you go down the leagues, the expectation of a football club based on reputation. And I'll be honest, and I don't like using this, it is a bit of a cliche, but you do look at their squad on paper. And I know football's not played on paper, you're going to get all of that, but it is genuinely one of the better squads in League One, if not one of the best. When you talk about lads of experience, Aidan McGeady, people like that, and I know that they're the wrong side of 30, perhaps. You're talking about lads who've played in the Champions League, for crying out loud. I'm not saying they should be beating everyone every week. You're not expecting that. But they are definitely underperforming and have been, sadly, for the last few years. And I think it's maybe the model of the club is that maybe going for those sort of maybe more higher profile signings, etc. And so, like you say, as the fans, they do demand that. If you're going to spend X amount of money and expect the fans to pay X amount of money, then you expect the results on the pitch. And sadly, the two haven't married up, which I think has led to the situation where they are now.
And that leads on quite nicely to some of the questions I've got about Lee Johnson, which I'm sure the Sunderland fans will have in their heads as well. But Lee Johnson joins as head coach on a 2.5-year deal. He's part of this ongoing change behind the scenes at the club where they've got the new sporting director coming in. And one of the biggest tasks, Craig, based on what Charlie said, is getting rid of some of those older pros that have sort of plagued them for a decade, even when they were just surviving every year in the Premier League. They sort of had a history of getting in these older pros who had played at the bigger level on big money up at Sunderland, but perhaps the hunger, the most basic attribute in football, wasn't quite there. So is the main job for the sporting director and Lee Johnson, and perhaps part of the reason he's been picked, is it because he's the man who's capable of doing that long term and regenerating the squad?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the transfers in and out, Sunderland, and obviously they've got rid of loads of players. It's pretty much a whole squad. I think it's just literally buying the wrong players at the wrong time. Like Will Grigg, for example, the signing that came at the wrong time. Obviously, Will Grigg wasn't really scoring for Wigan at the time, but Sunderland desperately needed a striker, but they picked a striker that's not on form, and they paid the price for it because obviously they spent $4 million on him, and it's not really worth getting gold. It's not there really, and they obviously bought someone in that can actually probably recruitment is probably better. But the problem is they have to recruit differently because obviously there's no money at the club. Also, that's why Stuart Donald's trying to sell the club anyway. Where do you look at recruitment? Do you look at youngsters from that just been released? Do you look at players that have been in the lower leagues?
I think just to add, sorry, Dan, I'm just looking at this squad, and and I'm not here to bash players because some of these lads have had stellar careers there, but people like Danny Graham, all great pros. I'm not knocking that, but those lads aren't going to be on smaller contracts. Do you know what I mean? So I think that's part of that financial thing. And that's probably one of Lee Johnson's first challenges is that you've got to try and shift these lads. And playing the way they are and losing the game today, for example, is not doing you any favours as a manager to shift them on. If I'm in a prospective club in maybe the League One again or Championship, trying to get some of those lads out. And that's always been, like you say, in the last 10 years, Sunderland's problem. They get lads in on bigger contracts and then can't get rid of them. And I think that's the problem. And until that model changes, I can't honestly see this cycle being broken.
Obviously, losing the Wigan earlier, that's not what you want straight away. Confidence will be low.
Well, that was sort of my biggest question today. Thinking very short term for Lee Johnson. I know, let's be fair, Sunderland had 16 shots to Wigan's 1 and Wigan scored, but they're only one of the game. But it wasn't a pretty performance. And was perhaps, Charlie, his biggest fault being bold enough to go in the dugout on his first day rather than watching for the stands like so many do?
Yeah, I think there's a gamble to that, and I think if if they won today, as you say, and they could have done by the sounds of it, it suddenly looks like new manager bounce, the lads want to, and all of that, and it would breed a bit of confidence. It would give you a bit of momentum, not in an arrogant way, but I suppose as a manager you've got to back yourself, and if they're playing bottom of the table, it could be a good way to ingratiate yourself with the fans. Who I don't know. I don't want to comment on the reception after our Shrewsbury one, but do you know what I mean? What the reception of the fans are. But, a win with you being there, he looks like he's committed. He's signed a contract. Right, I'm going straight in. I'm not going to wait until they play another game. So I think you have to admire the boldness of it. But unfortunately, it doesn't look amazing and probably didn't give him the best start.
And with the January window round the corner, Craig, if nothing else, at close hand, it's given him a bit of an indication as to how much work he's got to do. Yeah,
but it's not just him that's got obviously a big job in his hand. It's the new sporting director that's got obviously block players out. As I said, is there a budget? Is there a budget for something? Probably not. Obviously, he only wants to sell, and obviously he's been desperate to get a new owner in, a buyer. Yeah,
it's one of the things they're going to have to hope probably happens before January the 1st. But the one thing I want to ask you before we get on to the what we expect of the season is the one thing that worried me with this appointment. I think it's a brilliant appointment. I think it's the right one for Sunderland. Definitely. But my worry is that Lee Johnson is a longer term appointment. There's no doubt about that. It's about regenerating a squad, building a vision. But in the short term, and Craig sort of mentioned it earlier on, is the demand, rightly so for a club of Sunderland's size, is we need to go up this year. And with the way that Lee Johnson's going to be tasked with rebuilding a squad, is that realistic? And if it doesn't happen, what then happens? Because the Sunderland fans are going to be expectant, and he's already going to be on the back foot by the end of the season if he doesn't take them up, isn't he?
I mean, he was under a bit of pressure. He went to Bristol City. They were on the verge of getting relegated from the Championship. So it's not like he's not been in a pressure cooker situation before. You know, he would have come into a similar sort of environment. The difference being, like we mentioned before, if you're a team that's near the relegation zone, anything apart from getting relegated is a bonus. Whereas if you're a team like Sunderland near the top of the league, you know, you've got to be up there in and around that sort of playoff at the very least. And I think that's the difference with that. I honestly hope they give him time, because really, I don't want to go down that road of there's no one else out there, but I can't see a manager who would be longer term the best fit for this club. But you have to give him that time. And it hasn't worked with this short term, right, let's see if we can get an instant impact, you know, get a few big names in, get a manager in, give him a year, bosh, are out. That hasn't worked. They're no better off than they were 2 years ago. So on that basis, maybe it does need a new approach, a new tact, which is right, not right off this season. If we can get something out of this season, that's a bonus. We'll be in and around maybe the top 8 or 9 and build from there. But we have to accept that this year, we might have to watch and eat a little bit of a negative sort of experience. But then the following year, like we mentioned almost a bit when we said about Paul Cook a few weeks ago with the Sheffield Wednesday job, the following year, that's when we're going to hit it hard. And then that's when there's the expectation. And rightly so, with Lee Johnson, you'd expect him then to have hopefully had a longer term plan. I'll be honest, previous history doesn't suggest that he's going to get a long time. And that is the caveat that I think when you have Lee Johnson, you have to give him the time, not even the money, to be honest. I think it's just that time to build a squad, build that philosophy that he has had at Bristol City. That, like we mentioned in previous episodes, every year he was at Bristol City, they got better and better and better. But you can only do that if you've got time to do that. So for me, I don't know. It's a bit of a 50-50 how this one's going to play out, which is a shame, really.
I completely agree with that. And I mean, the one positive I'd give to Sunderland fans is the only time we were ever told that as Luton fans when we were in non-league was by John Still. He came in and he said, we would a few points off the playoff chase. And he said, right off the season, I will get this exact squad nailed for next year and we'll win the league. We won the league, 100 points, 100 goals. So give him time. I'm sure he can do that. But Craig, coming back to you, I think that's probably the biggest question, isn't it? Is do you think, while planning for the future, while trying to change the philosophy, while all this stuff's still going on in the background, can Lee Johnson get them into the top 6 or the top 2, as we've predicted, this season? And will the Sunderland fans give him next season if they don't?
I hope he gets time. I really do. Do I think they'll get in the top 6? Well, they didn't get in the top 6 last season, even with the points per game. I don't think their squad's strong. I really don't.
I agree with you.
Even though they're only the third loss of the season. As I said earlier, they're drawing far too many. I don't see enough goals, but it's the sloppiness at the back as well. I don't think they've got this year. I think they might. It's either top 2 or don't get in the playoffs, because they have such bad luck in the playoffs. Yeah, so Sunderland will probably want either top 2 or 7th, because they don't want to go through the playoffs and have that heartbreak again and again and again. I don't think they make top 2. I think they'll probably finish outside the playoffs.
And I guess for Charlie as well, the other thing with the playoffs, as Craig alludes to, is you'll probably get less time to prepare for next season, which is going to be, if we're predicting it, the most important one.
That is tough, because to be honest, I hadn't even considered that until you mentioned it, to be honest. I think you have to allow for that if you're a Sunderland fan, that expectation of games coming thick and fast. We all know that. We've spoken about it in different episodes about different managers and teams. You have to allow for that. I just think that this season has to be, I love that John Still example, and maybe, this is going to sound odd, not getting in the playoffs is not as disastrous as it sounds this season. I think because it gives you that summer, it gives him a little bit longer to work on the stuff and bring in the players he wants. The issue I think they've got is financially, I don't know how it lies with contracts and stuff, so I don't know how that's going to play out, particularly January, over the summer, because Sunderland, sadly, I think even managers, they've signed them on long-term deals and haven't kept the manager for more than 2 years for the last however many managers, and yet we'll sign a manager on a 2.5, 3-year deal. So it's something that he maybe can address from inside. But the point I'm making is, if they don't make the playoffs this year, is that a disaster? No. Obviously, is it upsetting? Is it difficult as a Sunderland fan? Yes. But I just hope there's a bit of rationality out there that they can say, right, okay, maybe longer term, this could be a good appointment. So although I'm annoyed and gutted we haven't made the playoffs, is it going to ruin the fact that this season and he should be sacked? No. But I can understand when you're a passionate fan of a club like Sunderland, that's not always easy to take. It's not an easy pill to swallow. So, as you said at Luton, it's a gamble if you're going to stick with it. But it could pay off.
It's a financial thing, to be honest. Obviously, being outside the playoffs is not good. But hopefully they have a structure. Obviously, now they've got a salary cap as well.
I think I was just going to add really quickly on that is that, the quick, I mentioned it earlier, but the quick fix approach hasn't worked. It hasn't worked for Sunderland for the last 10, 12 years, to be honest. And actually, if you look at the times they've had successfully back in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was built on a team in the Championship, but it had the likes of Niall Quinn, people like that in the Championship, or whatever, Division 1 as it was then. And it was a long-term project. Sunderland got relegated. They rebuilt a year and then went back in on, with not relatively unknown players, but not the big names and on the big sort of money that they're on. And that was their most successful period. The recent approaches haven't worked, so there has to be a change of that. Otherwise, it's just going to be round and round and round. And they might get promoted to the Championship, but then they'll probably get relegated again with this current structure and this current setup. So you have to, as a fan, sometimes just accept, right, this isn't working. We'll have to write it off, but this has to change. This has to change the way we set this club up.
Yeah, that's my main thing is I think it will probably take till the summer before a lot of those players, there's not going to be interest from other clubs with the wage they're on, the age they're at, the performances they're putting in. You're probably going to have to wait for the contracts to expire before you can actually rebuild the squad. So my final question for each of you, as it would be, I mean, you've both basically said you don't really think Sunderland will be in the top 6 this year, and it probably isn't as much of a disaster as it sounds on paper. So the two-part question to finish on is, quick answers from both of you. I'll start with Craig. Do you think Lee Johnson is the right man for the job? And do you think next season, based on your previous answer, Sunderland will be on the top 2?
Long term, yes. Given the right backing, obviously new structure, yes, I think Sunderland will be up there. Next season, not this season.
Charlie?
I've alluded to it. I definitely think he's the right man. Whether they're in the top 2 next year, I don't know. There's a big overhaul of players that needs to happen. I think they'll be in and around that playoffs at the very least. Top 2 could be a bonus, but I would be amazed in next season if they're not in the top 6.
And I'll finish by not sitting on the fence as always. I'm actually, for the first time ever, I think the three of us are all in complete agreement. I don't think Sunderland will... They might sneak the top 6 this year, to be honest. I think they might just edge in, but I don't think they'll go up, and I don't think it's a bad thing, because if they can rehaul the squad next year, they can sort out the off-the-pitch stuff, which seems to be going through. Then next season, Lee Johnson can build a better, younger, more hungry squad, and they'll be ready for Championship football when they get there. Because, with our weekly Championship predictions, we'd quite like to have Sunderland back there, I'm sure. But that's all for this one. If you did enjoy it, please do put a thumbs up on the video. Hopefully, if you're a Sunderland fan watching after today's game, you're not too doom and gloom, because I'm sure there's better days to come. If you haven't already or you know along, please do subscribe down below and turn that notification bell on. We've got regular episodes like these ones, weekly Championship predictions, and plenty of interviews with current and former pros. But a big thank you for watching. Thank you for Craig and Charlie for joining me as always. You can follow us on Twitter at HonestFootball3, and we'll see you next time.